started this training slide out by talking first about the importance of the risk assessment. I think that's one of the major changes in this edition, is that you are required to figure out the type of job that your people are performing and then look at the risk and the hazards and then provide training necessary for those risk hazards. The next thing is they talked about it from a newly hired craft person, how you could go about getting that particular person some training documentation. And the good thing about it is there is some stipulation, some outline stipulation giving you some guidance on it now. In the previous OSHA standard, there was not. So basically, they've come out and said, you can confirm that the employee has had training. You can use examinations or interviews to make initial determination that the employee understands the information that they need to understand for their particular type of job tasking, and also through supervising the employee closely. So a supervisor could supervise that employee closely during this time period and then ensure that they can demonstrate the proficiency that is required. So it also expanded the requirements for tree trimming operations, and the expanded area gave 3 areas, gave very clear, distinct areas for personnel that are non-qualified tree trimmers. So it actually said the skills and techniques to distinguish nominal voltage, the minimum approach distances, and then the proper use of techniques for that. So it's very important to understand the differences between that qualified and non-qualified. It removed the requirement to keep detailed records for employee safety training. Now that is the biggest one. In the past, it had to be documented. That has been removed. Of course, there's a lot of language that talks about what you can do and should be doing, but the actual language says that that is removed. It does, though, in this language, as it did in the last OSHA updates, requires that the employer ensures with demonstrated proficiency, so there has to be that process in place for that demonstrated proficiency. Any questions? Yes.
Pam, on the training for the risk assessment piece, if you're a contractor working for the host utility, do you perform risk assessment in partnership with the host utility? Do you rely only on the host utility's own risk assessment, or do you do your own as a contractor risk assessment?
Yeah, pretty much it has to be both, and it's outlined in this particular part of the standard, and we're going to go over that in just a few minutes when we get into talking about the contract agreements. So if you don't mind, we'll hold that one.
How are we, excuse me, how are we going to demonstrate proficiency if we don't keep detailed records?
That's a good question. Best practice is certainly going to be that there's going to be records there, and there's probably nobody in this room that's not going to keep records, but according to the law, you do not have to have the records on it.
Yeah. Let me chime in here just a little bit. Also, you know, regardless what the law says, regardless of what the standard says, we as an industry need to use best practices. We need to do what we know is right and what keeps people the safest. And it's oftentimes over and above what the standard is, even with the new revised rules. And anybody out there that doesn't document things is just really asking for something. It doesn't matter whether they say that you don't have to do it anymore. You're really asking for problems if you don't document them.
I'd like to add one statement to that too, Mac, and you're right on. But if you go back to the job briefing, let's look at paragraph C of 269. Does it say you have to document the job briefing, written? No. But if you've been involved in an investigation or anything else, what's the first thing they ask for, and how do you prove that you had a job briefing? I kind of equated that, plus also the statement is still in there that supervision will assure proficiency, and at least once a year, you know, put it somewhere. And if you don't document it there, how are you going to prove you did it? So that kind of supports what Max says.
Any other questions? Okay.
Pam, you said earlier that in lack of keeping records in training, that detailed observation by a supervisor would suffice for that. Does the supervisor have to be qualified in that field to make that observation?
Well, it doesn't stipulate that, but certainly they would need to be qualified. The employer has the due diligence to ensure that they have the right people performing that task, and they would definitely need to have the knowledge base to be able to perform that task. It really will go back to the employer to ensure they have the right person in the right job for that.